So every guitar I make is a reflection of who I am. I see myself as an artist who has an imagination, a soul, and originality. The part that I love the most about working with wood is that it connects me with my roots. You know, there's a sense of comfort when I'm in the shop and all my senses are stimulated, whether it's through touch, sound, smell, the way it behaves under a chisel. It's really home to me. So I spend about 300 hours on the guitar. And by no means am I trying to compete with these manufacturers of guitars. So to spend that amount of time on each guitar, I need to ensure that the guitar is going to sound good. So it starts with the wood. Now I'm very picky when it comes to wood. The wood does have to be seasoned, and what this means, it needs to be aged. I use wood that is between 2 to 5 years, and I just acquired some wood that is actually 30 years old. So I look forward to using that wood and to hear what that guitar would sound like. Now it's fascinating to know that each piece of wood that I buy has its own unique story. And I think that's a pretty cool thing to know. So once all the wood is picked, the first step is working on the body. So I take the top, I take these book-matched pieces and I glue them together, and then I thickness them to a particular thickness for that specific for that piece of wood. And then what I do is I introduce the rosette and then I start bracing it. Yeah, I would say that the top is the most important part of the guitar. It's what gives the guitar its voice, its individuality. So my guitar designs are a reflection of my personality and my perspective. Although like most guitar makers, I've learned largely by reproducing what I've seen in other instruments. My early instruments are inspired by some of those great instruments of the past era. For example, my first guitar I built was based off of a 1946 Martin Dreadnought. And so today my instruments are inspired by these iconic instruments. Although I still have my own little interpretation, and I make small changes to show my perspective and my style. So I do believe in a blend of heritage and originality. So everyone asks me about bending sides. In fact, it's actually quite easy. I use a 500-degree bending iron, and I thickness the sides to a certain dimension, and I soak the sides in water. And then I slowly bend the sides with this bending iron, and just, you know, water plus heat, it creates steam, and it's quite easy to manipulate the wood. The most important ingredient in bending wood is patience. I think it was the spring of 2014, and I was in search of some hardwood to build an office desk for myself. So I went to this exotic wood store, and I remember walking through the store, and I found myself in this one section of the store that had all these perfectly book-matched pieces of wood. I remember one piece, it was Cocobolo. It was so interesting looking, and you know, I was hypnotized by this wood. Now, I remember the owner coming up to me and says, "Hey, do you build guitars?" And I was like, people build guitars? That's so odd, because, you know, in my head I thought that all guitars were manufactured. I thought that hand making instruments was, you know, a thing of the past. And so anyways, he asked me to follow him, and I remember so vividly, we went up this dark staircase up into a second floor that I didn't even realize existed. So anyways, he opened the door, turned on the lights, and, you know, 2 steps in, and I was mesmerized. I saw, you know, 4 guitars being made, different stages of the builds, and, you know, that that moment, that what if, came into my head. And shortly after, on the way home, it was the why not. And so I recall the next morning I drove back to the store and I signed up, and the rest is history. So closing the body is always sad, but it's also satisfying for me. It's sad because it's visually hidden away from the world forever, but it's satisfying at the same time because it gets me closer to hearing that guitar's voice. Now, I remember completing my first guitar. I was stringing it up at my parents' house. We had a craft day and we're spending some time together. And I remember I plucked that first string and I couldn't forget it. It was like a baby being born. And that was probably one of the most exciting days of my life. And I have to say that I'm lucky that I was able to share that moment with my family, because I think it was a proud moment for all of us. So once the body's complete, you then start working on the neck. I use Honduran mahogany. It's lightweight, it's stable, it has a rich tone. For the fretboard, I use ebony from Africa. It's this beautiful, dark, super dense material, and it can stand the test of time and also abuse. Fretting the guitar has to be precise. If you're off slightly by any of the frets, you wouldn't be able to tune it or even play it for that matter. So there's some pretty intense geometry that goes into the neck and fingerboard, just so that the guitar can intonate and play properly. I have an appreciation for making the neck to these strict measurements and guidelines, and part of it is it brings out the perfectionist in me. I think everyone is creative in some way or form, and it starts with an idea. Now, if we can't give form to our ideas, then these ideas will never exist outside of our heads. So my experience as a guitar maker allows me to freely express my ideas and my creativity. I would say that no musician or craftsman is completely free from outside influence. I honor those who came before me, and I call this tradition, and keeping the tradition alive. So I would say it's the nature of artistic culture. So as a luthier, I improve through communication between me as the builder and the musicians that I help, whether it's through its range, ease of playability, volume, or whatever to further that musician's abilities. I appreciate the challenges that each musician offers me, and because what emerges from my shop is that unique sound, a better playable guitar, the volume of the guitar, and ultimately that work of art that's customized to each musician. So this back and forth communication between musicians that I help and the relationships that I form with them is a very big part of my journey in becoming a great guitar builder.